What makes avoidance easy is that they all read from the same playbook. Different avoidants might have slightly different specific behaviors, but the underlying pattern is identical across all of them. Stage 1 is intense connection, where they're present and engaged. Stage 2 is slow withdrawal when attachment starts forming. Stage 3 is hot and cold inconsistency, as they manage the tension between wanting connection and fearing it. Stage 4 is complete deactivation, where they disappear emotionally or physically. Every avoidant follows this exact sequence. The timeline might vary. Some move through the stages in weeks, while others take months. But the sequence is invariable. Once you've seen one avoidant move through these stages, you've seen them all. There's no mystery to unpack. There's no unique psychology to understand. They're all running the same program with slightly different execution speeds. Avoidants are easy because their behavior is always about them, never about you. When they withdraw, it's not because of something you did. It's because their attachment system is activating. When they're cold, it's not because you're inadequate. It's because intimacy is triggering their fear. When they leave, it's not because you weren't enough. It's because their patterns always lead to leaving. Understanding this makes the avoidant easy because you stop taking their behavior personally. You stop trying to figure out what you did wrong. You recognize that you could be the perfect partner, and they'd still withdraw, still be inconsistent, still eventually leave because they're not responding to you. They're responding to their own internal fear that gets triggered regardless of who they're with or how well that person treats them. The behavior isn't about you, which means there's nothing mysterious or complex about it. It's just fear playing out the same way it always plays out. They're easy to predict at every stage. Predicting the avoidant is so simple, it's almost boring once you understand the pattern. In stage 1, they'll be more available than they'll ever be again. They'll text consistently. They'll make plans. They'll be affectionate. You can predict this phase will last until attachment starts forming, which happens when consistency creates security, when vulnerability has been shared a few times, when the relationship starts feeling real rather than theoretical. The moment real attachment forms, you can predict stage 2 is beginning, like clockwork. No mystery, no complexity, just predictable progression from one stage to the next. In stage 2, you can predict the avoidant will start creating subtle distance. They'll be slightly less responsive to messages. They'll need more space or time to themselves. They'll start focusing on your flaws or incompatibilities. They'll become busier with work or other commitments. You can predict this. Withdrawal will increase gradually until you react to it, and your reaction will determine how quickly they move to stage 3. If you pursue the distance, they'll accelerate into stage 3, hot and cold. If you give them space without pursuing, they might stabilize temporarily in stage 2 before eventually progressing anyway, because the underlying fear doesn't resolve just because you're not pressuring them. Stage 3 is equally predictable. The avoidant will cycle between warmth and coldness in response to their internal management of desire for connection versus fear of vulnerability. You can predict they'll be warm when they miss you or when they fear losing you, and cold when intimacy feels too threatening or when they need to restore their sense of autonomy. The cycling is predictable based on these triggers, and watching an avoidant in stage 3 is like watching a thermostat. Temperature rises until it hits the fear threshold, then cooling mechanisms activate until it drops below the loneliness threshold, then warming mechanisms activate again. There's no mystery. It's just mechanical response to internal discomfort. Stage 4 is the most predictable of all. You can predict the avoidant will completely deactivate when intimacy demands exceed their capacity for vulnerability. The specific trigger might vary: you expressing love, discussing future, needing them during crisis, or just accumulated intimacy reaching critical mass. But the deactivation is inevitable. You can predict they'll become distant, cold, checked out. You can predict they'll either explicitly end the relationship or become so unavailable that the relationship effectively ends, even if they're technically still in it. And you can predict they'll frame the ending in ways that protect their ego. You wanted too much. You were too emotional. You weren't compatible. They're not ready for relationship with anyone. The predictability is absolute once you understand the pattern. They're easy to manage if you want to. Once you understand how easy avoidants are to read, managing their behavior becomes simple if you choose to. Not that you should manage them. Healthy relationships shouldn't require behavioral management of another adult. But if you wanted to keep an avoidant engaged longer, if you wanted to prevent their withdrawal, if you wanted to maintain their interest, it's absurdly easy because they're so predictable. You simply give them what maintains their comfort: independence, space, low pressure, high availability from you, without requiring high availability from them. You make yourself the exception to their pattern by never triggering the fear that drives the pattern in the first place. You stay in stage 1 by never allowing real attachment to form. You prevent stage 2 withdrawal by never needing anything from them. You avoid stage 3 hot and cold by accepting whatever they offer without asking for more. Managing the avoidant also requires you becoming avoidant yourself. You mirror their distance, you match their level of investment, you stay slightly less available than they are. You maintain mystery and independence that keeps you interesting without threatening. You never pursue when they withdraw because pursuit accelerates their progression through the stages. You essentially become what they're attracted to: someone who doesn't need them, someone who has a full life, someone who could take them or leave them. And if you can authentically be this person, not perform it but genuinely be it, the avoidant will stay engaged because you're not triggering their fear. You're giving them connection without the vulnerability that makes connection threatening. But here's what makes this management strategy both easy and pointless. Managing an avoidant by never triggering their fear means you never get real relationship. You get extended stage 1 at best, a pleasant surface connection that never deepens because depth triggers the fear you're carefully avoiding. You get someone who's present as long as they never have to be vulnerable, as long as you never need them, as long as the relationship costs them nothing. You can keep an avoidant engaged indefinitely by accepting a relationship that meets all their needs while meeting none of yours. That's easy to do if you're willing to sacrifice your needs entirely. But doing it means you're not in partnership. You're in management of someone else's fear, while your own needs for intimacy, vulnerability, and genuine connection go completely unmet. The ease of managing avoidance is also why people get trapped with them for years. Once you figure out the pattern, once you understand what triggers them and what keeps them comfortable, you can maintain the relationship by managing their triggers. But maintenance isn't the same as satisfaction. You can keep them around by being whoever they need you to be, but being whoever they need means abandoning who you actually are. The relationship becomes your full-time job, monitoring their comfort level, adjusting your behavior to prevent their withdrawal, suppressing your needs to avoid triggering their fear. And years can pass like this. Years where you've successfully managed to keep the avoidant engaged, but you've lost yourself completely in the process. They're easy to see through once you stop being fooled. The avoidance defenses that seem so sophisticated are actually transparent once you know what to look for. When they say they need space, you can see they're feeling too close and it's triggering their fear. When they focus on incompatibilities, you can see they're creating cognitive justification for emotional withdrawal. When they become critical of you, you can see they're devaluing to protect themselves from caring too much. When they claim they're not ready for relationship, you can see they're perpetually not ready because readiness would require vulnerability they can't access. Every defense mechanism is obvious once you understand the underlying fear driving it. The avoidance explanations for their behavior are particularly easy to see through because they're always the same explanations. They're busy, they're stressed, they need to focus on themselves, they're not in a good place for relationship, they need time, they need space, they value their independence, they're not ready for commitment. These explanations sound reasonable on the surface, but they're just dressed up versions of, "I'm too scared of vulnerability to show up for you." The avoidant is using socially acceptable language to describe fear-based withdrawal, and once you recognize the translation, you can't unhear it. Every time they say they need space, you hear, "I'm getting too attached and it's terrifying me." Every time they say they're busy, you hear, "I'm creating distance to manage my fear." They become completely transparent. The avoidance hot and cold is also easy to see through once you understand it's about their internal regulation rather than anything you're doing. When they're hot, they've managed their fear down enough to allow some connection. When they're cold, the fear has reasserted itself and they're protecting themselves again. The temperature changes aren't about you being more or less appealing. They're about the avoidance internal state. Understanding this makes their inconsistency both predictable and boring. You're just watching someone cycle through their own fear management strategies while they pretend those strategies are responses to your behavior. It's transparent and ultimately tedious because it never changes, regardless of what you do differently. The avoidant is also easy to see through when they come back after leaving. They'll return with some combination of missing you, recognizing what they lost, claiming they've changed, or wanting to try again. But you can see right through it. They're not fundamentally different. They're just in a different phase of their cycle. They've been alone long enough that loneliness outweighs fear temporarily, or they've tried connecting with others and found those connections threatening too, or they've idealized you in your absence and forgotten why they left. They're not returning because they've healed their attachment wounds. They're returning because their discomfort with aloneness temporarily exceeds their discomfort with intimacy. And you can predict that if you take them back, they'll repeat the exact same pattern, because the pattern is driven by unhealed wounds, not by the specific person they're with. They're easy to walk away from once you see clearly. The real reason avoidants are too easy is that once you see them clearly, walking away becomes effortless. When you understand they're just running fear-based patterns, when you recognize they'll do this with everyone until they do deep therapeutic work, when you see that nothing you do will change their trajectory, leaving becomes obvious choice. You're not leaving someone complex and mysterious who might be different if you just understood them better. You're leaving someone simple and predictable who will continue these same patterns indefinitely because the patterns are about their unhealed trauma, not about your inadequacy. Walking away is easy because you finally understand the relationship was never about you. You weren't being rejected because you weren't enough. You were being kept at distance because the avoidant is terrified of closeness with anyone. Your particular qualities, your specific behaviors, your individual worth, none of it matters, because the avoidant would respond the same way to anyone who triggered their attachment system by getting close. Understanding this removes the sting of rejection. You weren't rejected. You were just the current person experiencing patterns the avoidant has repeated with everyone before you and will repeat with everyone after you unless they address their core wounds. Walking away is also easy because you can predict exactly what staying would look like. You know the pattern, you know the stages, you know the inevitable progression toward deactivation. Staying means signing up for known pain, the gradual withdrawal, the hot and cold that creates anxiety, the eventual complete shutdown. You're not staying with someone whose potential you believe in. You're staying with someone whose limitations you've mapped completely. And choosing known dysfunction over unknown possibility becomes absurd once you see it clearly. Why stay with someone who will predictably hurt you in ways you can now predict precisely when you could find someone capable of consistent presence? The ease of walking away also comes from recognizing that the avoidant doesn't actually offer what you need. They offer stage 1 intermittently if you manage them perfectly, but they never offer sustained intimacy, consistent vulnerability, reliable partnership. They're not capable of those things without extensive therapeutic work. So you're not walking away from potential partner. You're walking away from project, from person who would require you to suppress yourself indefinitely to maintain a connection that never deepens. Once you see this clearly, leaving is easy because you're choosing yourself, your needs, your right to partnership that doesn't require you to be someone you're not. They're easy to replace because the pattern is identical. Here's perhaps the most devastating truth about avoidance being easy. They're completely replaceable because they're all the same. The specific person might be different, but the pattern is identical. One avoidant is interchangeable with any other avoidant because they all progress through the same stages, they all use the same defenses, they all have the same fears. Dating a new avoidant isn't starting over with someone different, it's just watching the same movie again with different actors. The plot is identical, the outcome is predetermined, only the faces change. This replaceability is why avoidants often move on quickly to new people. They're not finding something better. They're finding someone who's at stage 1 with them, someone who hasn't yet formed enough attachment to trigger their fear. But the new person will progress through the same stages, will experience the same withdrawal, will end up just as confused as you were. The avoidant is just resetting the cycle with someone new, rather than working on the patterns that create the cycle. And because the pattern is always the same, the new relationship will fail for the same reasons yours did. The avoidant is easy to replace, but also easy to predict they'll replace you, and easy to predict that replacement won't solve their core issues. The replaceability also means that what felt special or unique about your connection with the avoidant probably wasn't. The avoidant made you feel like you were different, like you were the one who understood them, like your connection was unique. But they've felt that way in stage 1 with everyone. They've told other people they've never felt this way before. They've created the same sense of special connection with multiple partners because stage 1 is always intense and always feels meaningful. What you experienced as unique was just the standard avoidant stage 1 experience, no different from what they had with previous partners and will have with future ones. Recognizing that avoidants are easy to replace means you can release the fantasy that this specific avoidant was your person. They weren't. They were just a person with a predictable pattern that you happened to encounter. Someone else with secure attachment who can offer consistency, vulnerability, and real partnership isn't a replacement for the avoidant. They're an upgrade from pattern to person, from project to partner, from managing someone's fear to building mutual connection. The avoidant is easy to replace with someone better once you recognize that better just means capable of basic relationship functions without extensive management. They're too easy because they never actually change. The ultimate reason avoidants are too easy is that they don't change without intensive therapeutic work that most of them never pursue. They're easy to predict because they're static. They repeat the same patterns in every relationship. They have the same fears driving the same behaviors, producing the same outcomes. Relationship after relationship follows the same trajectory because the avoidant is bringing the same unhealed wounds into each new attempt at connection. They're not learning from failed relationships. They're not examining their patterns. They're not doing work to develop capacity for sustained intimacy. They're just repeating, which makes them extremely easy to predict and extremely frustrating to actually be with. The lack of change means that understanding avoidance doesn't require ongoing study. You learn the pattern once and you've learned everything you need to know. There's no evolution to track, no growth to accommodate, no development to understand. The avoidant you meet in year 5 of knowing them is the same avoidant you met in year 1. The patterns are that stable, that resistant to change, that consistently repeated. This stability makes them easy to understand, but it also makes them impossible to build with. You can't create future with someone who's going to be the same in 10 years as they are now, still running from intimacy, still managing through withdrawal, still incapable of vulnerability. The avoidant's failure to change also means they're easy to outgrow. You might be confused by their patterns initially. You might spend months or years trying to understand them, accommodate them, help them. But eventually you grow through that phase. You recognize the patterns for what they are. You understand that trying to help someone who won't help themselves is futile. You realize that patience with someone's limitations becomes enabling when those limitations never improve. And once you've outgrown the phase of trying to understand or help the avoidant, they become boring. They're just doing the same thing they've always done, living the same limited emotional life they've always lived, creating the same pain they've always created. They're too easy because they're too predictable because they never change. The ease reveals the emptiness underneath. What makes avoidance too easy is ultimately that there's no depth underneath the defenses. You keep excavating, keep trying to understand them more deeply, keep hoping that beneath the fear is a person capable of real connection. But the defenses aren't protecting hidden depth. They're concealing emptiness where emotional capacity should be. The avoidant hasn't developed the internal resources required for intimacy. They don't have skills for vulnerability, for emotional regulation in relationships, for tolerating the discomfort of closeness. They're defended against developing those skills because developing them would require facing pain they're determined to avoid. So there's nothing underneath the patterns except more fear, more defense, more avoidance. The ease of understanding avoidance is actually sad once you recognize what it reveals. They're easy because they're limited. They're predictable because they're stuck. They're simple because they're underdeveloped emotionally. What looked like complexity was just defense mechanisms stacked on top of each other. What seemed like mystery was just opacity created by their inability to articulate their own internal experience. What appeared to be unique was just the same basic fear all avoidants share expressing itself through this particular person's specific behaviors. The ease isn't flattering to them, It's evidence of how constrained their emotional world actually is. Understanding that avoidants are too easy should lead to compassion for their limitations, while maintaining firm boundaries about what you'll accept. They're trapped in patterns they didn't choose, patterns that were created by childhood experiences they had no control over. That's sad, and it's worthy of empathy. But their having explicable reasons for their limitations doesn't obligate you to accept those limitations in partnership. You can have compassion for why they are the way they are while refusing to sacrifice your needs to accommodate their unhealed wounds. You can hope they eventually do the work to heal while not waiting around to see if they will. You can wish them well while walking away from the predictable pain their patterns create. The ease makes staying the ridiculous choice. Once you understand how easy avoidants are to predict, staying with one becomes absurd. You know what's coming. You know the withdrawal is inevitable. You know the hot and cold will create anxiety. You know the deactivation is the predetermined destination. You know they're not going to change without intensive therapeutic work. You have all the information. Staying means choosing known dysfunction. It means signing up for pain you can predict with precision. It means accepting a relationship with someone who's completely transparent in their limitations, while hoping somehow the outcome will be different than what you know it will be. Staying becomes ridiculous because you can't claim ignorance anymore. You can't say you didn't understand their patterns. You can't pretend you thought they'd be different with you. You know exactly what they're capable of and what they're not capable of. You know their fear is stronger than their desire for connection. You know their defenses will ultimately win against any attempt at real intimacy. Staying means accepting less than you need from someone you've already confirmed can't give you more. It means choosing familiar disappointment over the possibility of actual partnership with someone capable of showing up. The ease also makes trying to fix or change the avoidant absurd. You can see clearly they need therapy. You can articulate their patterns better than they can. You might even understand their psychology better than they understand it themselves. But understanding doesn't equal fixing. You can't do their therapeutic work for them. You can't want their healing more than they want it. You can't love them into growth. The ease of understanding them doesn't translate into ease of changing them. If anything, the ease of seeing them clearly should convince you that change is their work, not yours. And it's work they'll only do if and when they decide the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of doing the work required to be different. Avoidants are too easy. Too easy to read, too easy to predict, too easy to manage if you're willing to sacrifice yourself, too easy to see through once you understand the pattern, and ultimately, too easy to walk away from once you recognize that all their apparent complexity is just fear wearing different costumes, repeating the same performance with different audiences, creating the same outcomes regardless of who's trying to love them. The mystery dissolves, the intrigue fades, and you're left with someone simple, limited, and predictable. Someone whose ease of understanding should tell you everything you need to know about whether staying is worth it. It's not. Because easy to understand means easy to see there's nothing underneath the defenses worth waiting for them to dismantle, nothing behind the patterns worth accepting the pattern to access. They're too easy. And once you see it, leaving becomes the easiest decision you'll ever make.